There's a scene in Spider-Man Brand New Day where Spider-Man is dragging the Punisher underneath a rampaging Hulk who is being controlled by Jean Grey so that the Punisher can just unload a mag into the underside of the Hulk. Had you asked me after No Way Home what the next installment of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films would look like, I could never have predicted it. Hulk, Punisher, Scorpion,
Did you miss me, Spidey?
Tombstone, The Hand,
Fly!
Yelena,
Hi.
Sadie Sink as Jean Grey, and Peter dealing with some pretty concerning problems of his spider DNA taking over. It sounds like a movie that should collapse under all of that weight. You know, I've always heard that Spider-Man 3 was overstuffed, that there were too many characters to establish a consistent storyline throughout the film. But Brand New Day, I think, had far more characters, and for the most part, they made it work. That's not to say that the film isn't messy at times. You know, sometimes it looks like it's a TV show that's going to make $1 billion at the box office rather than an actual blockbuster. There's a handful of plot conveniences as well that feel like they're pulled straight from a Disney Channel show.
Looking good.
I did leave the theatre with some questions that the movie either didn't want to answer or didn't know that it had raised. But it gave me nearly everything that I've wanted in an MCU Spider-Man film since Civil War back in 2016. Jesus.
I'm Peter.
Tony,
What are you doing here?
it's about time we met.
The thing that Brand New Day gets most right is that at its core, despite being full of all of these ridiculous characters, it's still a Spider-Man film. It's still a Peter Parker film. We've got Peter, MJ, Ned, Jean Grey, Jean DeWolf, Jean Splicing, Sarah, May, Metzger, Castle, Banner, Tombstone, Scorpion, The Hand, Yelena, all moving through this story. On paper, that should sound terrifying. It could have easily become another MCU film where the title character feels like a guest in their own adventure. But every major character has a clear reason to be there. They're there to help Peter, to challenge him, or to emotionally affect him in some way. The movie makes room for those team-ups without losing sight of whose film it really is. Honestly, this is one of the first solo MCU films where I've found that the crossover characters feel quite well balanced. You know, in Homecoming, Peter had Tony Stark hovering over him. And Far From Home was a tribute to Tony's legacy and thematically a result of it as well. No Way Home was like a massive celebration of Spider-Man and the Spider-Men who have graced the big screen. But Brand New Day finally gives us these other heroes, or anti-heroes I guess, that are coming along for Peter's story rather than dragging him into theirs. And for how long have we been begging for something that at least resembles a street-level Spider-Man story? I know this isn't perfectly street-level. You know, there's still rampaging Hulk, mind control, mutants, and whatever the
Pizza time.
is happening with Peter's spider DNA. But Spider-Man and Punisher quipping and arguing with each other while they're chasing a tank through Manhattan is exactly the kind of vibe that I've wanted, that I think we've all wanted from this corner of the MCU. Frank feels dangerous and antagonistic to Peter's morals without that taking over as a major plot point of the film. We know that the Punisher and Spider-Man have different ways of handling a threat. Now, we don't need to spend a quarter of the film discussing it. We can leave that to another pair-up. Their moral disagreement plays out during the action, with Spider-Man obviously trying to contain the threat where Frank is just trying to stop it. And then despite that, we've got moments of the Punisher and Spider-Man both saving each other too. While we're on that topic as well, to finally see the Hulk back on screen has been one of my favourite MCU moments since Endgame. To finally see the absolute chaos and danger that he can unleash is just incredible. The MCU's kept Hulk at the sidelines since around Ragnarok, which was also nearly a decade ago. But with Hulk becoming this secondary character to Banner's primary, I'd kind of forgotten how scary it can be when he takes control. And I think there's a bit of a nod, not like a direct reference, but a kind of same energy moment to the Immortal Hulk Great Power, with Hulk stopping the fight when Spider-Man calls him his friend. It almost felt like Hulk knows who Peter is and who Peter was, not just Spider-Man. As great as the reintroduction of this Savage Hulk was, it was also one of the only moments in the movie that I had a bit of a gripe with. You know, after Hulk's sacrifice, I guess, he slips away, hits the ground, turns back into Banner, and then is wheeled into an ambulance. I was really excited by the thought that he had slipped away and might have hit the ground and done one of those giant leaps away, and then there would be this wild, feral Hulk out there waiting to reappear. It might have been a nice threat to have hanging over the MCU again. The Hulk is at his best when he's terrifying, not just some tamed skin tone for Banner. It did feel a little inconsistent with the lead up to his rampage as well, with the whole inhibitor situation and that being broken, and Jean breaking something inside of him, I think he said. It felt like there was going to be this fundamental change for the character again, and then it was just all resolved by rolling Ruffalo into an ambulance. I'm sorry, Mark, I left you in Collateral. But maybe they need Banner for Doomsday, and maybe they're saving Hulk for later on. I hope so. Anyway, Jean Grey. Jean herself is the core threat and apparent antagonist of Brand New Day, but she's also one of the emotional cores of the film, alongside Peter's struggles with friendship and isolation. Jean felt to me like she was somewhere between Wanda in WandaVision and Sentry in Thunderbolts. She's someone with this incredible power, but who doesn't yet have the control or the capacity to prevent it from consuming everyone around her as well. The use of her power when she's jumping between people as well reminded me a bit ethically of Kilgrave and Jessica Jones, but probably more accurately of Godolkin in Gen V. It felt genuinely evil, the way that she was possessing these people and using them as vessels to achieve her goals, putting innocent lives in danger, or killing them, I think, too. And the way she's able to freeze all those people in the climax, taking over the lives of anyone who's nearby, is pretty unsettling. But the movie's aware enough too to not make her just some monster that needs to be punched. The real resolution of the movie doesn't come from Spider-Man overpowering Jean. It comes from her being unable to overpower him, and yet he chooses to meet her with love and friendship instead. Thunderbolts used a similar idea with Yelena reaching into the void to meet Bob. In Brand New Day, it's Peter resisting Jean's control for long enough to reach the person underneath all of her power. It sounds so cheesy when I read that back, but Tom Holland and Sadie Sink killed it. It absolutely worked. It didn't feel cheesy for a second. Sadie Sink is already the best Jean Grey I've seen. Sorry, Famke, I loved you in Rounders. The writing's obviously in play here, but Sadie gives Jean this constant feeling of controlled chaos, like every emotion is just being held back by this door that could slam open at any second. Even when she's still, you can feel this tension rising. And then when her control is taken away, thanks to Peter once again giving extremely dangerous technology to somebody he has just met, by the way. But when Jean's powers are taken away, her performance doesn't turn into this just empty screaming and glaring eyes. Her actions still feel driven by a recognisable pain, by her loss. The scene in Peter's head between May and Jean just completely broke me. And then Peter steps into the memory himself. Peter and Jean sitting on that bed will be the scene that replays in my head when I think of this movie for years to come. The two of them delivered such strong but contained performances that it just broke me even further. I realised after the scene as well that if it was all happening inside Peter's mind, it wasn't ever really May comforting Jean. It was Peter using May's memory to give Jean that compassion he had once received and that Jean now needed. May wasn't there to save the day. It was always Peter. That whole scene gives Jean exactly what she spent the whole film believing she might never have again. Somebody who can see her power, her damage, her pain, and somebody who can see everything that she's done and still see somebody worth saving. From what I've always seen, Spider-Man in the comics is an ally to the mutants as well, so I love that we're starting to see hints of that appearing so early into the mutant story of the MCU. With Jean as well, I feel like there was these subtle costume hints that were just enough to be excited about without being annoyed by. Obviously the green coveralls that the DODC put her in, but also the green and yellow scrunchie that was Sarah's. Well, I think hinting at the Jean Grey that we'll eventually see. For the first time in a while, I left an MCU movie genuinely excited about the future of one of its new characters. Hopefully we see her again soon. Also, I'd like it on the record that Jean uses her jumping powers to problematically have a makeout sesh with Peter. Another Marvel lady to fall for the amazing Spider-Riz. Oh, God, why did I write that? On that note, this would have to be the buffest Peter Parker we've ever seen, right? Tom Holland's obviously put in a ton of work, but those teams of Hollywood trainers and dietitians, they know exactly what they're doing. God, I want one. He clearly looks great out of the suit, whatever, but with the suit on. That was a terrible segue, I just want to talk about the suit. This is genuinely the best live-action Spider-Man suit we've seen. The blue sections having that sheen, the subtle web texture on both the red and blue fabrics, that like tactile looking raised webbing that isn't really raised looking either. And mainly the entire thing actually feels like fabric, not just a digital layer placed over Tom Holland's body. And they've kept the emotive lenses, but they're now giving us a few moments where you can actually see Peter's eyes beneath the glass, giving him this human expression behind the mask without abandoning the visual language of the first installments. And while we're talking about the mask, I
Pizza time.
love that Peter was constantly trying to keep his mask on. Story-wise, he's trying to stay isolated as Spider-Man to bury Peter Parker along with everyone else's memories of him. That shouldn't feel like some big change to the genre, but it does. Because production-wise, superhero movies are scared to hide their actors' faces most of the time now. And the MCU's culprit number one, man, with its bull nanotechnology that every superhero somehow has access to for just their helmet. But Brand New Day makes a point of keeping Spider-Man's mask on, and with Daredevil back in the MCU, I hope this is a trend that sticks around. Back to the Spider-Man suit, sometimes the web shooters felt a little bit bulky on his wrists. That's it. That's all I could find. That's the only fault I could find with it. A little bit too much of the part of the suit that I usually love. Otherwise, it's just flawless. God, I want one. And I'm just as glad that the film gives the suit time to move as well. We finally have some amazing sequences of Holland's Spider-Man web swinging through New York after nearly a decade. And not just him swinging for a second or two between locations, actual web swinging and leaping and falling. There are some quite abrupt cuts to those swinging scenes, but the movement itself, I think, is some of the best live-action swinging physics put on screen. Only beaten by... you know which film. Come on. Also, after No Way Home, the fact that he's finally web swinging through a New York that loves Spider-Man is just heartwarming. The banners, the costumes, the flags, the signs. People are finally celebrating him rather than mistakenly blaming him or forgetting him. More importantly as well, the movie lets Peter stop and soak it in and feel it for a moment. The scene in the crowd outside the hospital really felt like old school Spider-Man to me. This version of Peter has lost everything. Ben, Tony, May, and Happy, Ned, MJ. He sacrificed his own identity and returned to New York as a complete stranger. Brand New Day understands what seeing himself reflected through New York's love would mean to him. It also does feel like a return to the best moments of the Raimi films where New York wasn't just a backdrop, it was a community that had a relationship with Spider-Man. It felt like there were a few other Raimi echoes present as well. Firstly, when Spider-Man and MJ get to Frank's new hideout, I was fully convinced it was the abandoned warehouse where Molina's Doc Ock sinks the reactor in Spider-Man 2. And then when Peter's having some trouble with his powers, the organic webbing, he's forced to take the elevator with some other occupants who comment on his outfit. Albeit this time his outfit was a crop top and juicy couture jeans. That scene probably got the biggest laugh in my theatre, especially the juicy reveal. The other burst of laughter I remember came from Ned describing Banner's loss of control and Hulk's rampage. He just goes, "Oh, so sad." Jacob Batalon has genuinely, I think, been the comedic backbone of the Holland Spider-Man films. His performance as Ned always seems to alleviate just the right amount of pressure without things becoming a joke fest and ruining the gravity of the scene. That does also bring me to the other part of the film that I wasn't too pleased with, Ned and MJ returning. I was pretty firmly on the side of the people who wanted a Holland Spider-Man film without Zendaya's MJ and the CEO's Ned. Just one movie for a bit of a break. I wanted Peter to have to live with the consequences of No Way Home rather than immediately rebuilding the old trio, which granted was handled very well in Brand New Day. I was one of the people that wanted Felicia Hardy to finally appear and be able to flirt with Peter without Brian the Boom Guy in such a well-established relationship between Peter and MJ. But to be fair, I also wanted to see the Chameleon as the villain of the film, which wasn't too far off of the vibe from Jean's jumping between people. But the Chameleon was Spider-Man's first ever supervillain. I thought it might have been quite poetic with the reinventing of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. The Chameleon's also one of the last major rogues that doesn't have a proper live-action treatment. I'd probably only add Jackal and Rhino to that list. No, I'm not counting Giamatti. Sorry, Paul, I loved you in Big Fat Liar. So yeah, I wanted something different than what they delivered, but having seen it now, I'm glad that Brand New Day brought Ned and MJ back. The film earns their presence throughout, and emotionally they were just tour de forces of the film. MJ showing the drawing of Peter and Ned ruined me. And the handshake at the end as well, that nearly caught me out. Pretty much every scene between MJ and Peter twisted that knife from No Way Home again. And they made sure that those moments were an acknowledgement of No Way Home's consequences. They didn't just erase them and reset the status quo to something familiar. And with Doomsday around the corner, Peter having those personal stakes again probably isn't the worst thing. We've already seen him lose everything. How much of his isolation do we really need to see, I guess? I do think there were parts of Ned and MJ's new selves that didn't work quite so well. MJ is solving the inhibitor issue, figuring out that the goggles have a magnetic field or whatever. It did feel like one of those Disney Channel conveniences. MJ says that she had changed her major from the exact thing needed to aerospace. It's lucky. The spider DNA story as well felt a little bit murky to me. It wasn't really established what was suddenly causing all of these DNA issues, and I don't think that the actual issue that it raised was really resolved at the end either. Outside of Peter accepting that he's both Spider-Man and Peter Parker and taking off the Doc Ock brain chip inhibitor thing, I don't really think that the issue with his DNA is solved, right? To be honest as well, Toby was the Spider-Man that I grew up with, but I've still always preferred mechanical web shooters. They make Peter's intelligence part of how he fundamentally has to operate as Spider-Man. Writers have admitted to using him running out of web fluid as an easy way to manufacture some danger. So I will miss the web shooters, but I think it's good that the organic webbing takes away that potential crutch. I by no means think that the organic webbing spider DNA plotline is a bad direction to take, but it's a major change to the character, and it feels like it was treated like a bit of a lucky dip tertiary issue. Also, I assume that Peter's immunity to Jean's mind control was to do with his spider sense, like how Doctor Strange wasn't able to fully push him into an astral projection. But, oh well, if I'm going to get any more nitpicky, I'd start talking about the Spidey tracker, which I'm not going to do. I thought the stunt coordination was great throughout the film. There was some really interesting uses of Spider-Man's webbing and his abilities every time he was fighting, but there was also quite a lot of cuts, and it made the continuity of the spaces they were fighting in hard to keep track of sometimes. Mainly when he was fighting a hand in the DODC courtyard. There's that moment where he finally goes sicko mode and tears off the inhibitor. It would have been great to see a longer take, like another Tower Bridge Peter Tingle moment, with Spider-Man just locking in and wreaking havoc on those 10 hand ninjas that he's dealing with, but instead we get a few jarring shots of him dodging like 7 shuriken, some floaty wire work, and to be honest, a fight scene that feels like it doesn't have a visual focal point. Beyond that, my biggest actual complaint would be the quite heavy-handed use of slow motion. It felt like every interesting movement was highlighted with a dedicated slow-mo shot. And slow motion is amazing to highlight important moments or choreographed action. But to read from the Book of Syndrome, when everyone's super, no one will be. I started ignoring the slow motion shots in this film subconsciously, I think, because they were just too frequent, and so they kind of lost their impact by the end. The last negative thing I have to say is that I don't know if it was the lighting or the framing or the camera movement, but occasionally there were some scenes that felt like it was just a high-budget TV show. The locations were all great. I think it was convincing that they would actually exist in universe, but sometimes it felt like they were just being recorded rather than being filmed, if that makes sense. Okay, enough complaining. I have a genuine question for you watching this. Did anyone else at first think that VMAX was going to be some Tom Marvolo Riddle style rearrangement of X-Men? No? Just me? Fair enough. Ultimately, Brand New Day isn't a perfect film. It has its moments that are over-edited, some questions are raised and not answered, some characters' resolutions are a little bit disappointing, and some storylines don't get the full weight that they deserve. But the main thing is the film understands Peter Parker. It understands that Spider-Man can work with and have run-ins with these enormous characters without being overshadowed at all. It understands that New York is part of his life. And it understands that the costume, the swinging, and the action only matter because of the person inside the suit. After years of multiverses, of cameos, of world-ending stakes, sometimes we just want to see Spider-Man arguing with the Punisher during a high-speed car chase through Manhattan, or trying to save a damaged young woman and discovering whether the people he loves can find their way back to him. So I won't be giving this film a score. Michael Giacchino already did that. All I can say is that if you've ever been a fan of Spider-Man, go and see Brand New Day. There will be something in it that reminds you of why you loved the character in the first place.